Let's see if I can make it through the second service. Because I didn't make it through the first, let's put it that way. All right. I'm good company? All right.
We're all trying.
Yeah. Jackie had to give me his tissue in the first service, so because Nancy used up all the other ones, so. Okay. Today, we gather to participate in a Unitarian Universalist flower celebration. This was also called the Flower Communion, a beloved tradition that has enriched Unitarian Universalist worship for over a century. Born from a desire to foster spiritual connection and community among people of diverse beliefs, this deceptively simple ritual was created in 1923 by Czechoslovakian Unitarian minister Norbert and Maja Capek. It's easy to dismiss it as a quaint, pretty custom, but it's more than this. It's a reminder that ritual, however modest, can help sustain us as we live out our values. Norbert Čapek, born in 1870 and died in 1942, founded the Unitarian Church in Prague, Czechoslovakia in 1922. Raised Catholic in Bohemia, which is present-day Czech Republic, as a teenager he grew disheartened by his priest's cynicism and the seeming failure of rigid Catholic dogma and authority to produce an inward, warm-hearted spirituality. Hence, at age 18, he became a Baptist, a fervent one, soon also becoming a Baptist minister. He was a powerful force, a compelling preacher, an editor of several religious journals, a prolific writer and composer of hymns, founder of almost a dozen Baptist churches, and an elected leader of the Union of Baptist Churches of Moravia and Slovakia. He was also a visionary thinker. His convictions became increasingly liberal, even radical, influenced by his study of the past and his openness to the theological ferment in the present. While studying the religious history of Bohemia and Moravia, he became convinced that the true faith of the Czech people was a free faith, a spiritual practice that prized individual conscience and pursued an ardent community life rooted in love. Around 1910, he discovered the Unitarian tradition and felt certain that it reflected the inner spirit of the Czech people. But he was not able to get support for establishing a Unitarian church, so he continued to develop his thought as a Baptist minister, though with increasing conflict. Catholicism had been the state religion of his homeland for years, and his writings were increasingly deemed anti-Catholic and censored. In 1914, the World War I on the horizon, and under threats of further reprisal from the government, he accepted a call to serve a small Baptist church in New York, followed soon after by a call to a larger Baptist church in New Jersey. However, Čapek's writings, which voiced his concern that the Baptist tradition was becoming dogmatic in its own way, led to 2 heresy trials soon after his arrival in the U.S. He was acquitted both times. But the personal sting ran deep, and in 1919, he resigned as a Baptist minister. A little over a year later, after having commissioned their 3 school-age children to sample the church Sunday schools in their New Jersey community, he and his wife Maja joined their children at the First Unitarian Church of Essex County. And from then on, at age 51, Čapek's spiritual vision found a home in the Unitarian tradition. After the conclusion of the First World War, Czechoslovakia became independent, and many Czechs seized on the opportunity to leave the no longer state-endorsed Catholic Church. Čapek and his family were among many other Czechs who decided to return from abroad to their homeland. And in his case, he went intending to found a Unitarian church that might invite the Czech people to rekindle the free faith and the true Christianity that he was convinced had deep roots in their past. And to say he was successful would be an understatement. While he and his daughter returned to Czechoslovakia, his wife Maja stayed in New York. Already during the ocean voyage back to Prague, with many Czechs among his fellow passengers, he offered talks on the true history of the Czech spirit, entwining its deep democratic spiritual inklings with support for Czechoslovakia's nascent democracy. Once in Prague, he set to building a church, not a structure, but a people. Recall those earlier references to compelling preacher and visionary thinker? After beginning with small groups of a couple dozen here and there in the fall of 1921, when he led the inaugural worship service of the Prague Congregation of Liberal Religious Fellowship in April 1992, there were over 1,200 persons in attendance. By the following year, Čapek wrote, "There were days when the large church where they rented meeting space, which comfortably holds 3,000 people, was filled to capacity, and that there were many who could not get in. And on Tuesday evenings, 700 or more gathered to hear the sermon a second time and discuss it. Successful? And then some. Membership of over 3,200 congregants." Excuse me. Norbert's approach to services was deliberately austere. It was a direct rejection of the ornate traditions he and his congregants had left. He eliminated ministerial vestments, elaborate ceremonies, incense, formal prayers, and rigid rituals, replacing them with simple sermons and hymns. While the congregation thrived on this intellectual freedom and rational inquiry, many members felt spiritually incomplete. They approached the Čapeks with a request. They needed something more, a gesture that would nourish their spiritual lives as well as binding the community together. Norbert and Maja's solution to honor both reason and spirituality was the deceptively simple flower communion. He needed a ritual that was without other religious associations and accessible to everyone. He created the flower communion and first instituted on June 24, 1923. Inviting everyone to bring a simple flower and place it in a large vase as they entered the church, Čapek preached about their common unity in heartfelt fellowship, regardless of race, class, or other distinction. A unity grounded in God who loved them all and who took joy in their common flourishing. A unity grounded in the shared purpose they had experienced over the past year, fashioning a community knit together by simple friendship and shaped by divine love. He reminded them that each of the gathered flowers had unique needs to grow and flourish, as well as unique beauty and gifts to offer, that each flower had a dignity and glory bestowed by God. Then he encouraged the congregation to come forward, each taking a different flower than the one they brought. These were to be taken home, and in doing so, he asked them to imagine themselves carrying home and caring for the needs of one another, noticing and celebrating the beauty of one another, and regarding with awe that God-given glory of their fellow congregants. A simple ritual, almost cute, except when practiced against the backdrop of rebirthing the spirituality of the Czech people and amid the shared experience of fashioning a community through the practice of friendship and love. And in that context, it proved a ritual that Čapek himself described as so powerful and impressive that I never experienced anything like it, adding that the most dry and rationalistic members were moved, and many an eye brought into tears. For nearly 20 years, Čapek persevered in his vision, though not without some turmoil. There was friction at times with the more conservative and perhaps envious Catholic and Protestant churches, as well as occasional episodes of infighting within the congregation amid bouts of financial desperation. Still, the Unitarian Church in Prague was at one point the largest Unitarian congregation in the world. Over 300 or more children and youth were enrolled in the church's Sunday school. The congregation sponsored a church leadership training program and an extensive community counseling program. Courses in religious history and philosophy written by Čapek were being used in the public schools. Alongside the struggles, his conviction that liberal faith, prizing individual conscience and communal fellowship, could leaven the whole of life, and that was being shown true in his practice. And then the Nazis came knocking, literally. First in 1938 at the nation's border, when Hitler demanded the annexation of Czechoslovakia's southern territory, France and Great Britain, with the silent assents of the U.S., decided it was a sacrifice worth making to preserve peace. Rather than answer Czechoslovakia's call for defense, they pressured the Czech government to cede the land. And when the government felt it had no choice but to accept Hitler's terms, the protest by the Czech populace was fierce, and Czech was with the protesters. By the following year, 1939, the whole of Czechoslovakia was in German control. In March, the American Unitarian Association wrote to Čapek, offering him a minister-at-large position in the U.S., with a stipend sufficient to maintain himself and his wife until he could draw a pension in 1941. His response, tendered almost immediately, remarked on his happiness at the offer of economic security, commenting wryly that it is the first assurance since 1921 that I have an economic background for more than 1 year, after which he politely but firmly declined their offer, asserting that he could not leave his people in this moment no matter what suffering might come. Čapek now found himself ministering to a congregation, really a national community, that felt abandoned by the world but was united within itself. Shortly after the German occupation began, the 14 distinct Czech political parties coalesced to form a single National Solidarity Party, NSP. In April 1939, the NSP invited citizens to register as members of the new party on the basis of a single yes or no affirmation at the polls to the ballot statement was, "I am a Czech." The results were announced on May 4th. Of the 2,083,427 persons who cast a ballot, 2 million, I didn't get through this first time either, did I? 2,079,185, 99.25% of them voted yes, solidarity. Life in the congregation in Prague continued with fervor, as well as in the 6 mission centers it sponsored around the country. Unable to buck the German occupation, the people fueled their inward fellowship with all the energy they had. Maja reported that the flower communion was being celebrated both in Prague and in the missions, and now a mystical embrace of dignity, beauty, freedom in the very shadow of death. Because of the crowds that came to hear Čapek preaching, Gestapo agents also attended regularly, listening for any covert messages he might be trying to pass to his congregation. Although he did manage to slip hidden phrases of national pride into his messages, even proclaiming in one sermon, "Knowing how to live is a great thing, but the highest knowledge of living must include the knowledge of how to die. For we are God's children and heirs of immortality." There is no record that the Gestapo ever caught on to the full subversive character of his preaching. When Čapek turned 70 on June 3rd, 1940, his congregation planned a festive celebration. More than 700 persons came, including noted guests from other churches and many organizations. More than 100 congratulatory letters and telegrams arrived, but the showstopper was a gift he received from the church's board of trustees, no doubt delivered apart from the public fanfare, a short-wave radio. As with all such radios sold in German occupied lands, it carried a tag that warned users that listening to foreign broadcasts was a crime punishable by death. From then on, it might be said that Čapek flirted daily with death, as it became his routine to listen to BBC or Voice of America broadcast each day for the next 9 months. It's not clear how widely Čapek shared the news he gleaned from these broadcasts, though it's likely they shaped the tone of his preaching. In any case, the following March in 1941, the Nazis came knocking again, literally this time on Čapek's door. There are too many details to fill them all in. Čapek and his 28-year-old daughter Zora were arrested and charged with listening to and disseminating foreign broadcasts. Čapek himself was also charged with high treason on account of his public preaching. After initial trial, they were held for an entire year before the appeal was heard in April 1942. Both were found guilty of listening to foreign broadcasts. But the court determined that Čapek's preaching did not rise to the level of treason. Zora was sentenced to 18 months, and Čapek himself, on account of his age, was given a 12-month sentence, including the recommendation that he receive credit for the 11 months already spent in jail. Zora served her sentence and survived the war, but when Čapek's sentence was received at the Gestapo headquarters in Prague, it was ignored. Actually, ignored is too light. The case officer there wrote on the file, "Send this prisoner to Dachau." His return is unwished. It seems likely that this death sentence came in retaliation for the assassination of the Nazi official overseeing the German occupation of Czechoslovakia. The Gestapo were livid, and executions of opinion leaders were rampant. On July 5th, 1942, Čapek arrived in Dachau. He remained there for a little over 3 months, put to hard labor. The only eyewitness report from Dachau, a letter written to Maja soon after the war ended, came from a Catholic priest who had been with Čapek in Dachau. He described their living conditions as brutal. There was such terrible hunger that we were driven to digging for earthworms and eating them. Then he recounted Čapek with awe and encouragement to others at all times, sharing his meager rations, bringing a great number of others to God there in the camp, a man whose countenance carried in it a higher power. On October 12, 1942, Norbert Čapek was put on an invalid transport and taken to another site to be murdered by poison gas. It may be apocryphal, but there is undoubtedly truth to the stories that came to say there in Dachau, Čapek celebrated his final flower communion, inviting those many of his fellow prisoners who were drawn to him to find whatever bit of green or beauty, whatever glimpse of art or echo of life could be found in the prison yard, and to make a simple pile. No vase this time. And then to tell yet one more time about the inherent dignity of each person, the grand and glorious reach of God into the human soul, and the joy, the true freedom that is born of human community when care is genuine and love is real. And finally, to invite those gathered around him to retrieve some shabby bit from that motley pile and transfigured it into priceless treasure. Sorry. Today we have access to many of the undelivered letters written between Norbert and Maja while he was in Dachau. Poems he wrote while imprisoned and statements from his fellow prisoners who survived the camps. These documents reveal the depth of his faith and his unwavering belief in the power of beauty and community to nourish and sustain us. He wrote that he found source of strength and connection to the eternal that sustained him during his imprisonment. His quiet conviction fortified not only himself but also his fellow prisoners who testified to his enduring spirit and ministry. They recounted how he even introduced the flower communion into the camps. Again, participants would gather whatever they could find. It was often just dandelions and blades of grass or twigs, and they celebrated their shared humanity amidst unspeakable hardships. In our own times of crisis and uncertainty, it's easy to view beauty as a luxury, something we can't afford when pressing issues demand our attention. The flower communion, as conceived by the Čapeks, challenges this perspective by affirming that beauty is, in fact, a necessity. When we gather flowers, create art, or simply pause to appreciate the natural beauty around us, we affirm that the world is worth saving, that life is worth celebrating, and that joy becomes an act, a powerful act of resistance. As Unitarian Universalists, we are often called to do long-term, often unseen and unrecognized work. And much of the work we do in our personal growth, in our communities, and in the wider world is an investment in outcomes we will never fully witness. Think about the social justice movements we all support and the systematic changes many of us advocate for. These are not quick fixes, but long-term struggles that span generations. In our own church community, we try to build something together. Relationships, traditions, a culture of welcome and growth. And knowing that future generations will inherit and transform what we create, just as what we have inherited from Norbert and Maja Capek's legacy. This flower celebration is practical support for the work that is asked of us. It grounds us and replenishes us when activism, caregiving, and the daily maintenance of community leaves us drained. Simplicity of shared gesture in the giving and receiving of flowers refills our reserves. It tells us our sacrifices matter even when our outcomes are slow. And it connects us to those who have come before and will come after us. The ritual reminds you that you are part of something larger than yourself, something that transcends your individual lifetime. The flower you receive from someone else is a tangible reminder that your work matters because you do not do it alone. If you want, just sort of think of this flower celebration as a sort of a spiritual gas station. We stop, we refuel on beauty and mutual support and recognition. And we go back into the work and our world with just a little bit more capacity. It doesn't solve structural injustice, nor does it replace strategy or policy, but it does nourish the people who sustain those efforts. By renewing our sense of belonging and purpose, the ritual helps us carry forward the patient, unglamorous labor that can often change hearts, institutions, and sometimes generations. Today, as you receive a different flower than the one you brought, receive it as a gift from this community. May it nourish and sustain you. May it fill your heart with courage and your spirits with hope. May it remind you that you are not alone, that others are walking this path with you, and may it inspire you to continue the sacred work of building a more loving, just, and compassionate world. Now let us come together in celebration of the simple and beautiful ritual that we have inherited from Norbert and Maja Capek. It is now time for our celebration to begin. And as we begin, Nancy will come up shortly and will explain how we will proceed, but we always begin with the consecration of the flowers. And this was Dr. Čapek's words. This is hard. Infinite Spirit of life, we ask thy blessing on these, thy messengers of fellowship and love. May they remind us amid diversities of knowledge and of gifts to be one in desire and affection, and devotion to thy holy will. May they also remind us of the value of comradeship, of doing and sharing alike. May we cherish friendship as one of thy most precious gifts. May we not let awareness of another's talents discourage us or sully our relationship, but may we realize that whatever we can do, great or small, the efforts of all of us are needed to do thy work in this world. Nancy? Sorry.
I think we all needed this. What we would like to do while Jackie plays is have the folks on these two sections of the church line up in that middle aisle over there, and these two sections line up there in that aisle, and then return to your seat via the middle aisle. So I'm going to have Dale and Lynn show you how to do it. Whether you brought a flower or not, all are welcome at this table. And may we begin.